Well, the border dispute is not only here in Kenya and Tanzania. I want to show you also what is happening in Uganda and Rwanda so far. This is what is on the front page of Daily Monitor today. I just showed you earlier. Inside story of a Uganda-Rwanda row. The build-up to the border standoff between the two countries dates back to events in battlefronts and alleged infiltration of Ugandan intelligence services. The story is tucked away on page 6 of the Daily Monitor. Just to read maybe an excerpt of it so that you can see what it does entail for you to get an inkling of what we're talking about. And it says that on November 9th, 2017, just to give you a history, a senior official from a diplomatic post, let me try and expand it, a neighboring country, lured a Rwandan refugee with cash into the hands of operatives from Uganda's now disbanded police flying squad. After realizing that they were under surveillance, the abductors, who had allegedly readied to illegally transport the refugee to Rwanda, instead dumped him at the Central Police Station in Kampala. The diplomat mobilized 5 men suspected to be foreign agents to remove the refugee, but lost the contest following a scuffle. Police detained the quintet. Officials familiar with the matter, but who asked not to be named due to sensitivity of the matter, saying this incarceration prompted the diplomat to seek freedom of the agents through top officials, the now disbanded flying squad. The Chieftaincy of Military Intelligence, CMI, last June took the senior police officer into custody, and he, alongside other colleagues, are being prosecuted for, among other things, alleged kidnap and illegal repatriation of Rwandan refugees. Now, this November 2017 incident, although outwardly isolated, mirrored the cumulative problems highlighted in various intelligence briefs to President Museveni about alleged infiltration of Uganda's security and intelligence services by the neighboring country and its agents. Tensions are currently high between the two countries, with Rwanda accusing Uganda of harboring its dissent elements, while Kampala has publicly only said, without elaborating, that the matters will be resolved. Source of trouble? Two highly placed sources briefed on the matter said also penetrated was the cabinet and media, and the officials spoke of wiretapping of the communications of top Uganda officials at highest levels of government. General Eli Tumwine, the security minister, told his newspaper yesterday that the claim of communication breach was not supported by evidence. And it continues here. While this is developing in Uganda, I showed you this earlier as well, this is what is happening in Rwanda. They're saying over 100 illegally held in Uganda. This is according to the foreign minister and spokesperson of the government, says Ibera. The numbers also are broken down here, and key concerns also listed here: illegal arrest, harassment, torture, and irregular deportation of Rwandans, trade sabotage by blocking exports from Rwanda going through Uganda, harboring elements with intention to destabilize Rwanda as well. This forms the basis of a discussion a bit with our panelists this morning, and there are other issues that we shall be looking at as far as security is concerned. Remember, today is Wednesday, and every Wednesday we have Standing on Guard coming away. We keep an eye on the enemy. Allow me, as you said, to introduce to you this morning Director of East African Institute of Security Studies. This is Dr. Werunga Simiyu. And also joining us this morning is Dr. Hassan Khannenje, who is the Director at the Horn Institute. We do have also with us Tom Kagwe, who is a political analyst and also the former board chair of, actually board member of IPOA. We do have with us as well Dr. Mustafa Yusuf Ali, who is a conflict resolution and national security expert, and we do have Professor Midamba with us, who is a KCA University Vice Chancellor, and also he is a foreign and diplomacy expert as well. Let's continue with the discussion and just look at this, what is happening, looking at the front page. But we can begin with that story by Mark Masai, which acts as a segue, or it can segue into our discussion this morning. Are we going back to that particular spot that we had with Tanzania again? Remember the chickens, right? Even though herders right now, they cannot cross over to Tanzania, right? Let's begin with Werunga.
Thank you, Debarl. I'm not very good in those things, but let me try. Matters of trade. I think we have a problem with the Tanzania for a very long time. And either Tanzania does not feel like Kenya is playing a honest game with them. And we also know stories of Tanzania having been the bottleneck when the East African community was debating about cross-border trade, free movement of people, free habitation of East Africans. And they had a major problem about people crossing borders and settling in other countries because they were fearing that Kenyans are very hardworking people, they are very quick, they do things on their feet, and they thought Kenya would overwhelm the people of Tanzania. So I think it is something inbuilt from the days of Ujamaa, when we were being called names. Tanzania has never given up on that, I think. And the fact that Kenya keeps on leaping ahead of it on many other fronts, we do not understand why it should be having issues with us, and yet I think it is a second or third trading partner for us in the region. You know, Uganda is the leading, and then Tanzania should be in the league of 3-4. And the fact that we are able to have these things in the region without necessarily them exporting or importing from outside, I do not understand why Tanzania is having an issue, yet we have mechanisms in the East African community under the trade portfolio where countries that have not caught up with the rest in East Africa have something like an affirmative action where they have been given a leeway to grow their industries, catch up with the rest in the East African region, and do legitimate business. So we don't understand the politics of Tanzania, and because I'm not very good in trade matters, that is my view.
All right, let's hear from Dr. Hassan Khannenje.
Good morning, Debarl.
Good morning to you.
I think building on what Dr. Simiyu was discussing, I think it's almost unfair because we've had the affirmative action for our neighbors for perhaps one of the longest when it comes to regional integration organizations.
Yes.
I think it goes back to the Moi days. And for some reason, it's an affirmative action that is not appreciated very well. And Tanzania's history of reluctance to being fully part of the East African community and the customs union is something that is well documented. I don't know what extra incentives they may want, but perhaps diplomatically we may have also to play our game differently. Now, having said that, part of this problem is also self-inflicted as a country, frankly. We have literally zillions of counterfeit products, and of course our media does a pretty good job in exposing them. And any neighboring country, you know, knowing what they know, that that KEBS logo alone is not sufficient to say to pass for an item that is authentic, I think some countries are going to be reluctant to actually accept our product because we've been doing pretty badly with regard to counterfeits or fighting counterfeits. And so while the history of reluctance of our neighbors is well documented, we also need to do a better job, first of all, in reining down some of these corrupt practices, but number two, diplomatically, in actually being a little more engaged and persuasive in letting them know that, look, this is for our common good, for mutual interest, and you stand a better chance by working closely within the East African community than working, let's say, with SADC, which they don't really get much out of.
Right, Dr. Mustafa.
Yeah, Debarl, good morning. Tanzania has been a reluctant partner in the East African Cooperation for a very long time. Tanzania has always wished and actually done so to look south, being engaged more with SADC countries for a very long time. The affirmative action that Simiyu Werunga is talking about is something that actually Kenya has given Tanzanian industries products to come into the country duty-free. And this was actually, at first they were given 5 years, this was extended, it went on and on and on, in order for Tanzania to build its industrial base. Kenya's industry was much better, and most of the goods that were being sold in Tanzanian supermarkets were actually from Kenya, from the early 2000s all the way to a few years back. They are, of course, improving on their industrial base, and a lot of products are now coming from China. I lived in Tanzania for 5 years, and I saw the kind of anti-Kenyan behavior that is there was pretty much high. at that time. And we also are to take some of these responsibilities, Debarl. In Kenya, with the kind of corruption that we are seeing, the fact that we ourselves do not trust the KEBS stamp of quality means that others are not going to trust them. And this goes down to the war on corruption that the president has started and has to sustain.
Thank you. Professor Midamba.
Debarl, this past week I've been looking at the top 10 Kenya trading partners, the outflow and inflow into the country. And if you take all that and put it all together, this country and Africa cannot grow.
Welcome back. We do apologize for that technical challenge. Of course, it was back to black. And we're just commenting here, of course, with a tongue, a family in Chic, that it is because Professor Midamba was speaking. And yeah, people from that area, we can just get the audio, yeah, and see the white teeth. So we shouldn't have actually gone out of, taken a station break. We should just continue with Midamba speaking. Yeah, and the viewers just watching the teeth. Yeah.
Kenyans don't listen to Debarl. Listen to the word. The most important thing is what I'm saying is whatever, all the trades that we're doing around the world, and I look at them very thoroughly, the most benefit that we have is coming from East Africa.
Yes.
Our #1 trading partner is Uganda, and unfortunately #2 trading partner is Pakistan. But in the top 10, we have Uganda, we have Tanzania, we have Rwanda, we have Burundi. And therefore, what we need to understand is whatever we do in our foreign policy development, trading, free trade zone for us in East Africa is going to benefit us in a short and a longer term than any other trading partnership. And therefore, we need to deploy the best that we have, all our diplomatic forces, all our trade expert, the private sector alliance, the president at his level, in order to unglue all this cluttering and problematic issues that is happening to Tanzania, and then Uganda and Rwanda. We cannot accept this as a status quo, or do we say now we are going to trade with Egypt more than East Africa?
Right.
That is where I'm coming from.
Right. Let's hear from Tom Kagwe.
Debarl, thank you for that. I think I will put it in a different context. When you look at international trade, and I'm privileged to have done my MA thesis on this subject. It's a question of whether we can agree to liberalize trade or continue with protectionism. There is this trend in the world that is coming up, and I was talking to my colleagues, that most of the countries, led by the United States of America, are doing a lot of protectionism. And this trend is becoming very difficult, especially if we are living in a globalized world where liberalization should guide trade, so that even when you say tariff and non-tariff barriers, this should be reduced. But the history of Kenya, Tanzania, and other countries which are in the East African community, it's because of, let's be honest with ourselves. Kenyans, we are capitalist by nature. I don't know, that's the trend we took from independence. Tanzania, on the other hand, went to socialism and with the issue of ujamaa. Everything we do, and especially because my colleague said, Dr. Ali, that corruption has ruined some of these relations. That you can have, for example, dry cell batteries sold in Tanzania, which come from Kenya, but the stamp is forged. either KRA stamp or KEBS stamp. But let's also remember that Tanzania is behaving the way it is behaving because of the balance of trade concept, that we have more to sell to Tanzania than they sell to us. Other than, I think, vitenge, I'm not sure how much more we buy from Tanzania. So when the balance of trade is unequal, especially for Tanzanians, they are prone to behave that way. Every country would behave that way. So they want to push and push the farthest. But one of the key things which the professor has just mentioned, which is a concept we need to encourage a lot, and from the countries he has read, is the concept we call the South-South trade. We cannot continue exporting things outside Africa and trading with partners outside Africa. We need to encourage more trade within the context of the East African community, the African continent, so that we reap the benefits from home. We cannot say that Pakistan is our next trading partner, yet the only thing we sell to them is tea. I'm not sure what we buy from them. So let's encourage South-South trade, and we will see these benefits trickle to the common person, whoever is a farmer or somebody doing animal husbandry. We will benefit a lot when we encourage that kind of trade. That's how I see it.
All right, thank you. And I think we also now can also continue that story and see what we were talking about on the front page of the New Times. Over 100 illegally held in Uganda, says Ibera saying this is the foreign minister of Rwanda. And I showed you also the Daily Monitor. We just want to continue the discussion, what is happening in East Africa, inside story of the Uganda-Rwanda row. I also read extensively for you to just give you maybe a snippet of what they are really talking about. But can we now drill deeper and talk about this dispute that we are having, especially Uganda and Rwanda? Where is it emanating and where is it headed to? Let's begin with you, Dr. Werunga Simiyu.
The Uganda story, that's from where Kagame came from. You know, Kagame came from Uganda. And he was an intelligence officer to Museveni.
He came from Uganda?
Yes.
Is he a Ugandan?
That's another story for another day. Even Museveni, we are not sure where he comes from. So, and you remember when he was with Museveni, he was Major Kagame.
Yes.
Then he took over from the late Major who was killed, the first leader of Rwanda Patriotic Front. So there was this thing between Kagame and Museveni. When Kagame took over in Rwanda, Museveni continued looking at Kagame as my intelligence officer. And it became very personal, and I think they've never recovered from that. So what I'm seeing between Uganda and Rwanda, I think these are personal issues that are now morphing them into country problems that to me I feel is not good for East Africa. Because the story of Uganda detaining Rwandese at the border has been there for a very long time. Rwanda has been complaining for about 2 years now that Museveni and his team have been arresting Rwandese across the border. And it's been something that I think Kagame has been very, very slow to act until the other day when they now made it a police thing. So I think the problem between Uganda and Rwanda is not about borders. It's not even about trade. Those are personality clashes that I think the East African community should deal with. And if they don't deal with it, we also have another problem with Kagame and Burundi. Personality clashes. Now, when you look at all those three countries having issues that are nothing to do with the people of the three countries, then I think we need to be looking at it as a problem in East Africa. Unfortunately, and this is my view, I wish President Uhuru was doing things differently. Because they say he's the only president who can tap another president at the back because he has no issues with another president. I just wish he had, and I'm not saying she's bad, I wish he had a very good focused and strategic foreign minister. Because that is where Kenya could have taken advantage to ensure that we leverage our goodness in the region to deal with these issues. I know President Museveni has a lot of respect for Uhuru as a person. Kagame, the same thing. Okay, the guy of Nkurunziza, we don't know. So I think the biggest problem is, so I think the biggest, yes, the biggest problem I think we have.
Development with Nkurunziza as well. We'll talk about it. Yeah.
Yes, the biggest problem I think we have with these 2-3 countries before we come to Somalia, I think to me those are personality issues that need to be dealt with by the regional leaders. Because if we leave it, we've seen countries go to war because of personality clashes of the leaders. And yet the people of the countries that normally go to war under these circumstances have nothing against each other. So to me, that's where the issue is. We need, the East African leadership must take over this thing, deal with it from a personality perspective, and stop what we are seeing between Uganda, Rwanda, and Burundi.
And this is what we normally say, that the African Union actually should have some of these issues as they, their topmost agenda.
That is the thing, yes.
Yeah. So let's hear from Dr. Hassan Khannenje.
Yeah, I think building along the lines of what Dr. Simiyu was saying, these are personal. And, for people who know the history of Kagame and Museveni, you know that Kagame, became a refugee in Uganda, I think, in 1959 at age 3. And, of course, later on, he would join the NRM from Museveni. And he rose through the ranks to become, I think, the head of the intelligence for President Museveni by 1986. And he only came to Rwanda following the death of Fred Rwigema, who was heading the RPF at the time of his Patriotic Front. Yeah, and became president. And I think the perception was like, I raised you, and you are a runaway child, and so the perception, it's like you're still my adopted son, but the truth is, Kagame is his own man. And he has proved that. And now the first serious fallout came when they both moved to Congo,
yes,
in Kisangani. And there were serious clashes between Rwandese forces and Ugandan forces, actually led to lots and lots of casualties for sustained period of time, even though they were supposedly fighting from the same camp against, of course, the coalition of Congolese, Angolans, and Zimbabwean, soldiers, troops, who were backing Kabila at the time. Now, this has continued, and the tension has really never calmed down. And a lot of times it's just a test of wills. And Museveni trying to show that I created you, but Kagame trying to say, I'm president of my own country. In fact, I'm doing pretty well. And I think as the East African community and the IGAD region, this is something, an issue that should be raised. These people cannot solve their problems by themselves. And they can only be facilitated. And as someone has suggested, this is the kind of issue that African Union should actually be dealing with, because if we can't address them, even at the East African community, for instance, we cannot achieve that level of integration that we want. When we are busy trying to fight border wars with, on the one hand, Uganda and Rwanda, on the other hand, Kenya and Tanzania, and on the other hand, that's just going to be impossible for us to achieve that dream. And unless, as the leadership of the EAC, IGAD, and the African Union using that forum say, you know what, we need to move beyond this. If we are going to see, in the words of Thabo Mbeki, African Renaissance, African Renaissance cannot come when we're becoming petty, because these are actually petty issues. These personality issues, they're extremely petty for countries when it comes to economic development.
Right. Let's hear from Dr. Mustafa Yusuf.
Yeah, Debarl, power in Africa is mostly personalized, and we see this kind of personality clashes then becoming a major problem at the state level. And the only way to deal with this, Debarl, is for frequent, free and fair elections to be carried out in these countries. If we had this, then most of the leaders who are overstayed their welcome would go, and new leaders would come, and that would cure the issue of personality clashes, particularly in countries that are bordering each other. The other point, Debarl, that is critical here is what is happening outside of Uganda and Rwanda in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So this competition inside DRC for whatever purpose, whether it's minerals or just trying to create a hegemony in that part of the world, is actually causing some of these challenges. So it's not really about now what's going on at the border. It's what has been going on for a while, and the personality clashes between these two leaders, Kagame and Museveni.
Okay.
Debarl, we in Kenya for a while played a major diplomatic role, particularly President Moi. And Simiyu Werunga said correctly that it is Uhuru, President Uhuru, who doesn't seem to have any personal differences with these leaders, whether it's Kagame or Museveni or Tanzania president. We need to play a very bold diplomatic role. Our foreign service need to be very focused. Our trade relationship need to be very focused. I serve on the Inter-University Council of East Africa. I'm one of the chairs. And for a while we've been having differences with Tanzania, but I'm very pleased to say that we are harmonizing. We can go and have lunch and laugh and talk about everything, and by the time we write a report, it's much more unified report that benefit the East Africa. So whatever diplomatic clout that we have within the East Africa, we have to play it, because we're either doomed together or we are going to rise above all together. But it has to begin from East Africa, leave alone the continent of Africa.
Okay, right. Tom Kagwe.
Mine is very simple. As Dr. Ali has said, if people outlive their usefulness, Kagame has outlived his usefulness for Rwanda. So has Museveni. Just look at Kenya and ask yourself, if Moi was in power, where would we be? We would be colliding with everyone. Moi left, Kibaki has come and gone, Uhuru is going soon. So this changing of leaders brings new blood to the issues. So for me, there is only one thing to be said, that regardless of the DRC crisis, that because everybody wants some minerals in DRC, from the United States to Belgium to Rwanda to Uganda, everybody wants some piece of the DRC. So long as we continue this, I would call it kleptocratic governance of looting and eating, we cannot move forward. Because that's, for me, the actual issue. Somebody wants something, and from what I have seen in not very verifiable sources about what Museveni owns and what Kagame owns in their own countries, then you can say that these people are kleptocratic by very nature. So it's just greed that is disturbing them.
So what does it portend, especially for the East African spirit of integration, when we have all these border disputes and we're still trying to streamline East African integration since this particular good idea was mooted? It seems things are not really shaking into place. So what does this portend for us when we have the free visas, let's say from Professor Midamba?
Debarl, if America fought a bloody war, and a lot of people died as a result of that. But after that war, America came together and became the superpower of the world. Europe fought from time memorial. But when it stopped after the Second World War and European united, they grow faster than they ever or any time in the period. So my point is very clear. We are either in it together to grow or we are doomed. And it has to begin at home. It has to begin from East Africa. We cannot, we are one people. There are Tanzania working in Kenya, there are Kenyans working in Tanzania, and Uganda. We have had tradition, even during colonial days, of the three countries working together. What is it now? And the trade, if you look particularly the trade between China and Kenya, and the trade between China and the rest of Africa. Short term, medium term, long term, we are going to be worse off than nobody can ever think. We cannot pay for the kind of investment that China has put here. And so we trade with each other, somebody take a little bit more. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not a zero-sum game. You know, and that's the point that we all need to understand.
Right.
I think, just to add on that, I want us to look at the totality of the problems we are having in East Africa. But there's just one denominator out of all of them. And the denominator is a person called Yoweri Kaguta Museveni. Kaguta has issues with us in Migingo Island. Kaguta has a problem with Southern Sudan because of Riek Machar and Salva Kiir. Kaguta has a problem with Kagame. Kaguta has a problem with Nkurunziza. And Kaguta had a problem with Kabila. And I don't know Magufuli, I think they are friends. So we must understand that all these problems we are dealing with in East Africa has a source. And this source is because of longevity of the person who has been in power, I think. He's the longest now in East Africa. While I partially don't agree with Dr. Mustafa about Kagame, we know who Kagame is. But I also think we've been in this civil society for some time. And when you listen to what the Rwandans say about their country, some of them agree with what Kagame is doing. I don't agree, most of us will not agree, but I think we call him a benevolent dictator. He has some focus for his country. Yes, it's very tough. I was even reading the other day, I think he has arrested 3 generals or something. Have you read something like that? I think 2 days ago. But I think we need to understand and look at East Africa from that angle. Who is the denominator in all these problems? Then we start talking from that perspective. And that's why we are saying if President Uhuru took his leverage, because he can talk to anybody in East Africa, I think that is one person who could have assisted this region to do what they need to do to ensure that we have harmonious relations between the 5 East African countries. And I just want to add, the issue of free trade has already been passed. We have the African Free Trade Zone area or something, that big thing.
Yes.
And several countries have actually already ratified, Kenya being one of them. So I think the issue of free trade is already there, but the problem is personality among the leadership in Africa. That's what I wanted to say about the problems we are having in East Africa.
Okay. Yeah, Debarl, maybe to extend this debate, because we are focusing on the region, Eastern Africa region, these countries can hardly afford this kind of very petty squabbles. Yeah. There are larger challenges with regard to border. Kenya with South Sudan with the Ilemi Triangle, Kenya and Somalia with the maritime border that we are facing. Abiy is in town, Farmajo, I don't know whether they sneaked into town last night to come and resolve these issues, but Abiy seems to be doing very well in trying to, you know, bring these heads of states together and go for a diplomatic solution, for a negotiated solution, rather than to go to ICJ, where ICJ can really, you know, be that kind of decision that is going to come from the International Criminal Justice may not be favorable to this country. And therefore, the negotiated solution that Abiy is pushing, and of course we welcome this kind of engagement. These are major issues that we need to be dealing with: the maritime border, the border between South Sudan and Kenya, Ilemi Triangle, and a few others actually that are in the Eastern African region, and Migingo, of course.
And that has not been resolved as yet. That is the tinderbox waiting to explode that Migingo Island. Hassan Khannenje.
Yeah, you know, sometimes it's ridiculous every time we keep going back to Migingo Island. Really, there isn't really much there. But it's a question of sovereignty that we know we need to exercise.
Yes.
But I think this morning, for me, one issue that is of urgency is the maritime dispute we have with Somalia. You know, at this stage, there's so much we have with Somalia, both because we are a frontier state, and you know we have one of the longest borders, of course, outside, let's say, Ethiopia. But because of what we're doing when it comes to the war on terror, for instance, we have our men and women in uniform who are there, And it looks as if the current tensions are actually not helping that. And some elements within Somalia might take advantage of that and say, you see, this is what we told you. So now, of course, the case and the dispute that we have does not look exactly pretty. I do not think allowing the ICJ to make the final ruling, it's going to be in our best interest. And as neighbors, I think this is something that should be negotiated. And perhaps we should be more proactive, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs should lead the process. Now, this thing has been going on. We know at some point we dropped the baton, you know, way back, I think, in 2009, before Somalia decided to finally go to the ICJ. And I think we should go back and start talking with Somalia. We have been so invested in Somalia for so many years that, you know, we can't just really let this escalate. And I think the current efforts being made should be enhanced and should be made more robust and more purposeful. And going forward, at no point should we actually let this process get out of hand the way it has, because it has serious implications for national security in case we fail to solve the maritime dispute we have with Somalia today.
Dr. I can see a question of leadership, yeah, Tom Kagwe.
Question of leadership.
I know this story.
You know, sometimes when he was saying about if the common denominator is Museveni, what would have Nyerere done? Because during the time of Nyerere, we had a problem with Uganda and Idi Amin, 1971 to 79. What did Nyerere do? Raid the fellow and get him out of town. In Kenya invited Israelis, and we raided together, we raided Entebbe to free Israelis. So I think one of the key things which must be said.
Did you invite?
Are you saying we should raid Uganda?
No, I'm not saying that.
For clarity, did we invite really? Or they just use Kenya as a rabbit?
No. It was negotiated. You know, for example, if Jomo Kenyatta was still alive, would Museveni try and say Migingo belongs to him? Because Idi Amin tried to say that Uganda extends up to Naivasha. What did Jomo say? Step even 1 foot inside. So we need strong, effective leadership in this country to move forward.
Werunga, let's hear from
Tom Kagwe. We need to be the solution.
Give Tom the
But I think on the Somalia issue, first, Dr. Mustafa, Elemi Triangle has a story. And the story we know is that we actually administering Elemi Triangle.
We are administering.
We were administering. And it has several, it has a story. A treaty of 1929, a treaty of 1936. There's one that later, and the boundaries kept going up. So it has a story. And Kenya has to be honest with that story. Because some of these treaties that we entered, even if they were done by colonial systems, they are valid. You see, like the River Nile. So I think Elemi Triangle is not an issue if we have to be a honest country and deal with the Elemi Triangle the way countries deal honestly. So that's not an issue. And I say this, I used to fly choppers in the military, so I know a bit of Elemi Triangle. And we know the story. So that to me should not be an issue. I don't want to talk much. I think that's a diplomatic issue. But to me, that's not an issue for Kenya. The biggest problem we have is the Somalia-Kenya problem. Mm-hmm. Now, there are two issues here. And I know a bit of the story, and we must blame our Kenyan officers in Arambe House, and there's a department that was called, is it Directorate or something of International Borders, where we had Professor Okumu. They forced him until I think he resigned. So we have a bit of story about this Somalia problem. Two maps appeared. One, the Italian, because Somalia was governed by Italy. And then there's the British one, and of course the ones that have. So while Somalia is saying it wants to go diagonal down, Kenya is insisting we go straight at 30 degrees, whatever. So if we agree Somalia to come down, we are losing 85% of our, the extended one is called what? EAC. Yes. And then we are losing about 25% of our original one. Now, that in terms of a country is not acceptable. But the reason why I think we lost, when the Kenyan delegation went to The Hague, and this I speak with a lot of confidence because I know they did not carry along the then chief advisor to the president on international borders. And yet it is the man who had prepared these documents. He had gone, I think, to Britain to bring the maps. He had gone to Italy to bring the maps. He had written an advisory on how to deal with that issue at the International Court of Arbitration. When the 17 or so characters went to The Hague, they never went with him.
That is to the ICJ.
So the problem is our people here, and the president must go deeper and understand why people in this country behave as if this country is a shamba in Charangani or in Trans Nzoia. No, it is not right. I speak with a lot of bitterness. That's because right, we're having these problems because we have people in this country who are given responsibilities and they always play as if this country is a small plots in Karen. That is how that thing ended up at The Hague. And take it from me, if they want me to call the fellow I know about of this story, the president needs to be told the truth. We are where we are today because we have characters from the AG's office. When Guido Muigai was the Attorney General, we had characters from Arambe House and that directorate that went to The Hague, minus the chief advisor on international borders to the presidency. So they go there, the case, they have no idea, they don't know how to do it, because per diem, it's called per diem. You know?
Per diem seeking.
Yes, but I'll tell you this. I'm telling you this, because if that case was handled properly, we will not be at The Hague.
Yeah, at Debarl, there might have, it's true actually, there are some missteps, and when you look at the military, as the Navy has been plying that route, you just need to go and look at the logbooks at the Kenyan Navy, that the naval vessels have actually been working in that area, patrolling that area for over 35 years. And so that in itself means that that's part of the Kenyan territory. You know, even during Siad Barre's time, the Kenyan Navy used to patrol, meaning that, and there was no objection whatsoever about that. Now, a case at ICJ, or if the United Nations Conventions or the laws of the seas, UNCLOS 1 and 2 are to be used, these are some of the facts that are actually going to be presented on the table that Kenya will clearly indicate that, look here, we have actually been pursuing our interest in these maritime waters, and that Somalia is coming very late. Now, it's very important that Kenya puts forth a very strong team that understands this challenge in order to explain and argue the Kenya's case well, properly.
All right, now Midamba.
Simply, Debarl, do we have the right people negotiating on our behalf? And are we out of the right people in Kenya? Kenya has a lot of qualified people who understand these things, who need to be involved on talking on behalf of Kenya. There is a precedent that AOU passed, which is not to go back to the pre-colonial days to fight over the borders. These are understood very well. Kenya cannot lose 1 inch of its territory. Kenya need to draw the line. We need to have the right people to negotiate on our behalf and taper down rhetorics, such that we can harmonize it through diplomatic means.
But who really negotiates for Kenya? Because it seems that on the negotiating table, everything is skewed against Kenya. When it comes to some of its projects, when it comes to, you know, what are we talking about with the ICJ and we're not having the chief advisor. I mean, the technical issues that need to be
Attorney General.
Could we hear from Khannenje? We'll come to you. Yes.
You're asking when it comes to a number of issues. I think last year on this show, we showed the president meeting the runaway toddler in the White House called Donald Trump, and with the Kenyan delegation. You saw what Americans, how they looked like, and Kenyans, apart from the president, no one else was even taking notes. Okay? Now, those are the people who actually negotiate for us a lot of times. Well, no wonder we don't come back with anything because we have not even gone with anything. We can't even remember what we were talking about. You know, what are we going to report back home? Now, the thing is we have to change our strategy. When it comes to issues such as this one, there have to be people who are competent, who have knowledge, both the technical know-how and other legal expertise, to a team that is formed that is going to actually be maintained for a while. Not something ad hoc you put together today, then tomorrow that you send away everybody, so that we can be able to follow through. And as I had indicated, and Dr. Werunga has mentioned it, we had this thing, but then we dropped it ourselves.
Yes.
We had it, actually. And so going forward, for us to lose this territory, it is really going to be a huge setback. But not just because of sovereignty issues, and we exercise sovereignty over parts of that, in large part. We're the ones who had a presence militarily in that part. We got rid of the pirates from that place. The place also holds apparently, or reportedly, significant hydrocarbons, which can actually have the potential to transform the economy of this country. This is something of national interest that we can't just let go. And as he did mention, we've been having negotiators who treat Kenya as if it's a plot or a shamba in Cherangani. We can't. And a lot of people going out there, as he did mention, rightly so, for per diem. Some of our representatives, they are sleeping most of the time, during some of these sessions. No, we have to be deliberate, purposeful, get competent people, because, as I've mentioned this show before, our foreign policy is tied to our development for public policy. We cannot achieve Vision 2030 if we cannot protect our resources or even market our products or ourselves. That is very, very important for us to note. And going forward, I think the maritime issue has to be given the seriousness it deserves, but at the same time, make sure that those who are representing us this time, they're not going in there for per diem. And if they are, then we shouldn't actually be wasting our time with them.
Right. We had something to say. We'll wind up on this.
Because you see, I look Kenya everywhere. So I love this country. You see, I'm Kenya everywhere. I love my country.
Yes.
But when we find some charlatans, let me use that word, taking this country as if there are small plots in Kiserian. Debarl, any country that loses an inch, and I speak with a lot of bitterness because I think I'm more patriotic than most of those fellows, you cannot play around with an inch of this country when you've been given responsibility by the government of this country to go and defend our soil. The office of the Attorney General is the custodian, is the legal custodian of anything that the government does. All these other fellows are on the periphery, but under the leadership of the Attorney General. When we had a person in charge of international borders as an advisor, this is a fellow who has worked in the Commission of International Borders at AU. I want you to listen to this. He was there for several years advising AU on matters of international borders in Africa. Right now, I don't know where he's, somewhere in Britain, or he's relocated, I think, or something. Maybe he's visiting. But the UN is still looking for this man to take him to Sudan, South Sudan, for purposes of borders. Yet Kenya has the audacity to throw this kind of people because some fellows want to go to The Hague to buy mitumba and come back. So it is very crucial that the president of this country, I know he's overwhelmed. There are many things that we always say the president is overwhelmed. And that one we agree he's overwhelmed. But he has characters in this government that for as long as we leave them standing and eating and driving gasless, this country will suffer until we get the right people. Because that thing, the way I understand and I've read when I started reading the story of our borders, is that most of the times that court will never decide and give it to any country. They will say, go and negotiate. Most of the borders, they never hand it over to any of them.
So it will be back on the negotiation.
Yes, so it will come back to negotiation. Now, that is where we need the right characters, if it goes that route, to negotiate on our behalf.
Okay. We need to wind up on it so that also we can look at other matters, unless you have something pressing to say. Tom Kagwe, Dr. Mustafa, just to wind up on that particular topic.
Just to conclude this matter, well, we have a situation. Well, it's important that Kenyans rally behind the president and to work towards getting this part of the Kenyan territory, that it's not lost. It is very rich area in terms of hydrocarbons that are there, and more importantly is Kenya's territory. The sovereignty of Kenya is at stake if we lose such a significant chunk of territory, 100,000 square kilometers to be precise.